Hi, class. So we are going to work on chapter 6 today. So let me just jump right into it here. And this chapter, it really just goes all over the place. So just hang on, because it kind of has so many different topics within this chapter that, which I feel like is every chapter of this textbook, but this one especially jumps around a little bit, and so I want to hit the highlights. Okay, so just a quick recap on the bioecological model. You guys have been thinking about your own. We've studied this back in chapter 1, but it's going to be a common theme. Today we're really kind of looking at how some of these other layers, the other systems, affect the microsystem. So we'll be talking about school influences and peer groups, and then we'll also be talking about media and technology. So it all has the common theme of how it affects the microsystem and specifically the child, but it also, is going to jump around topics quite a bit. Okay, so first thinking about how, just within the microsystem, how that child is affected is primarily through their family. We've talked about this. You've done a discussion where you shared about your microsystem. And so we've been thinking about that a little bit. And one of the main components, and this came up a lot in your submission on your culture with our phone, was a language, right? Language sometimes is something that even if you were born in the US, you're still offered the opportunity to learn your family's language, and that is part of your family's culture. It also can be a reflection in our society of social class, the ethnic group that you associate with. Many times families want their native language or the language of their ancestors to be passed down through generations, and it is one of those connecting points for culture. It's important too to respect that when children come into a school setting, whether it's daycare, preschool, or elementary school, recognizing that families are going to want to talk in their native language or their home language. That's really important, to be open to that, to not assume if somebody's talking in another language, that means they're talking about you, to be confident enough to allow that and to embrace it. That's really important for children to feel that, and because it's part of the acceptance of not only their family, but who they are. When children have to figure out how to be different in different places, it can be very confusing to them. It can put an undue pressure on them. And so it's important to really value the home language and make sure that that child feels supported with that. Also, the family's interests. This plays a critical role in sort of how the family is bringing that child up. We've got two different scenarios here in these pictures. Obviously, there can be even more options. But if we think about a family that's really into sports, they might be instilling values of work ethic, perseverance, practice makes perfect, competition, even, hopefully in a healthy way, but competition, teamwork, right? Those are all some values that we sometimes gain from organized sports. And those can be, in the right context, very important and very good for children to learn. On the other hand, we've got a scenario where this family's playing music. And while they're playing music together, music a lot of times is a way of expressing yourself individually or connecting with your culture and feeling a part of past generations and your family group. But it could also, like I said, be very individualistic, especially if you're creating your own music as a way to express yourself. There could be more of a mindset where, hey, just do what feels right. Do what expresses yourself in your own unique way. If it doesn't work out, you just try something different, right? That can be some of the things we learn through music and learning music and the individual expression of it. Where sports is, there's some rules to follow and we need to participate as a group, know your place. And so you can see how different interests within a family even can lead to kind of a different mindset about the world as well. And sometimes, of course, these overlap where families that like sports also like music and all of the different variations. And that's actually best because then you've got, a nice balance of all of these types of interests that can be helpful. Status is another thing that really can affect how the child is brought up or how the child fits into society. This becomes even more obvious to children, the kind of comparison factor, when they are out of the home and going to school. Not out of the home as in grown up, but when they start leaving the house to go to school, they will start to be at an age where they're more aware and see how other children might dress. Brand names versus ratty, older looking clothes, maybe. They might hear about activities that families do and compare it to what they do and wish that they had that. They move into a developmental state of comparison where if they're visiting another child's home, they wish that they had those things at that home and aren't maybe as appreciative of what they have at their own home. Family dynamics become more obvious. Some children, when they're young, think their family is how everybody else is, right? They're still in that egocentric kind of phase. And so they think, oh, well, if I have a mom and a dad that are married, everybody has a mom and dad that are married. And then once they're going to other friends' houses and they hear about their lives, they realize, oh, there is a difference. Some parents don't live together. Some kids don't have a mom and a dad. They have grandparents or other family members that care for them. And so the family dynamics become something that can add or can be something that a child evaluates their status based on those ideas and that comparison to other people, materials, toys, even things that the child has that they wish that they had something like somebody else. Those are all part of what children take in to sort of think about their status. And some of this we can't control as parents. We can help them understand why, our family is the way that it is. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to stop wanting other things. My children still want a 2-story house with a swimming pool. It's not going to happen. And we've explained why multiple times, and it doesn't seem to satisfy them. They still want a 2-story house with a swimming pool. And so, but that's just part of life, is also being able to accept that other people have other things. And you can make decisions in your own life to try to get those things if that's important to you and a value. But if it's not a value, then you make other decisions. And that's an important life lesson for children to understand. So schools as socializing agents. Children, we talked a little bit about this last chapter when we talked about the shift from preschool to elementary school. Preschool, home life, this can look very different, right? Children are kind of more relaxed. They just get to play as they want. There is less of a routine or structure that they have to follow, or at least it's more geared towards a child's pace sometimes, where formal school is more specific to academics. Sit in this chair and we are getting through this material. The experiential activities become less important, or at least less prioritized typically in school. But a lot of those experiential activities really help to develop your social and emotional, or enhance your social and emotional development as a young child. And so if we think about the path that young children need to take, this is especially important in these first 5 years of life. But I would say that it should continue into elementary school for sure, is what do children need along the path to social emotional health? And some of them are some basic, right? They need financial security. That doesn't mean that they need to be able to buy just anything that they want, or that their family can do that. It means that they have enough that they don't have to worry about, will the lights be shut off? Will our water be turned off? Will we lose our home? Those are a much higher and chronic level stress, a toxic stress, if you will, than do I have the newest toy, right? Nutritious food. Now, this also doesn't mean that they have to only shop at Whole Foods or buy special organic protein bars or whatever. This is, am I getting a wide variety of fruits and vegetables? Am I eating foods that are not completely processed all of the time? Do I have enough food, right? It's not just, is it healthy versus junk food, but do I actually have enough? Or am I skipping meals? Am I missing out on food during the day? Children cannot work on their social emotional health if they're just wondering if they're going to get fed that day. Secure housing, that kind of goes along with the financial security, but having not only a roof over your head, but a safe environment within that roof. And so that could mean, people that care about you and love you, that are treating you well, in addition to having the safety of the actual structure as well. And then access to healthcare. If that child gets sick, are they able to have whatever impairment or ailment attended to by a physician? Is that happening quickly, or are things going missed? So, a child that has a toothache and isn't seeing a dentist for a long time, that tooth becomes infected, and then there's chronic pain, but the family can't afford or does not have access to the healthcare that child needs, that continues to be a problem. That ongoing chronic pain is going to trump basically all the other things that child needs to do in terms of development, because that chronic pain is such a stressor on that child. Now, that chronic pain could also be linked to a financial insecurity. It could be linked to not having nutritious food. A lot of times, many of these concerns go hand in hand, but these are things that children need on the road to social emotional health. And when they have social emotional health, that sets them up for best potential, school readiness, or what we call success. This partners nicely with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That's another one of the developmental theorists that's in that chart on your Canvas modules page. It's kind of the triangle where the bottom is these. You have to have this as your base: nutritious food, security, housing, healthcare. You have to have those as your base before you can start attaining higher level, or what we would consider social emotional health. So your book has a good example. It has some examples on page 128, but one is specific on how the mesosystem can affect the microsystem. And so this is one of those, we're kind of transitioning now into how school can affect the family and the microsystem, which has a direct effect on the child. So they gave an example where school administrators and teachers held a belief that parents that could not attend school functions or meetings don't care about their child's education. So they equated those. Later, when the families were surveyed, they discovered that only 11% of families at that school had access to a vehicle. That is a huge determining factor, having access to a vehicle, for being able to attend school functions and school meetings. However, the school had made judgments on the families that could not attend the meetings, assuming that that meant that they did not care about their children's schooling. So again, this goes to show when families don't have some of the basic necessities that children need for social emotional health, it can lead to bias, labels, tracking of children. And when I say tracking, it means kind of putting them on a path that really is not what they should be on. It's not about that child's potential. It's about a bias that a school believes about the family, and then in turn it has that impact on the child. Children are then required to, in scenarios like this, they're required to use a lot of energy just to try to combat a lot of negativity in their life. And instead of using that for normal development and best potential, they're just trying to combat the labels and the bias that's against them. More opportunities and experiences are limited to that child. Some of those doors even shut for them completely because they've been put on this labeled path that they can't do as much as somebody else. And it also creates a superiority complex. So families that could attend those meetings and those school functions simply because they had a car now are assumed to be better or to really care so much more about their child's education, when in fact that might not actually be true, right? So anytime there's bias, especially from one of the other systems down into the microsystem, whether it's on that, about that family, which is going to impact the child, or about the child directly, it creates, I mean, this is where we get classism, this is where we get racism, this is where any other unfounded judgments, it just becomes our way of viewing people. And in turn, it has this horrible effect on young children. And that makes the school and the teachers directly responsible for some of the barriers that these children have to face. And so it's really important, because what we want is the exact opposite, right? When we go into teaching and care for young children, we want them to have every opportunity to reach their best potential. But we're putting up barriers if we let bias and labels affect how we treat those children. So we have to understand this, and we have to understand that internal biases that we might have, and we all have them, it's a human trait. But we have to really think about how our internal beliefs can help us create the kind of classroom that we want, and more importantly, the type of relationships that we want with young children, with their families. That's so important. So it's really important to check your own biases. And especially if you have been in a situation where you've been affected by other people's biases. it doesn't always automatically mean that you're going to do the opposite. And so you just have to really think about your own self and how you perceive the world, and make sure that you're giving all the families opportunities to help their children and those children to reach most potential, right? And this can happen by promoting certain types of curriculum, certain programming within a classroom setting, but it has to initially come from our internal work to make sure that we're self-reflecting and that we're making the best decisions for families and children. Okay, so we're going to switch gears just a little bit, and we're going to talk about peer groups. So peer groups are another agent of socialization on young children, sometimes for the better and sometimes for the worse, but nonetheless, they help to socialize our young children. So one of the benefits of peer groups is that children get to choose them, right? We're all born with our family, and we didn't get a choice in that. And sometimes we luck out and sometimes we don't. And peer groups, though, are where children get a chance to have control, and they get to say who they want to be as part of their peer group and their friendships, right? Of course, we want them to be kind and respectful to everybody, but those people that really become their people, that's their own choosing. And that's an important factor when it comes to peer groups. It also is an empowering factor. So it can be something that we help young children understand. They have the power to choose who they spend time with. Are these people that they're spending time with building them up into the character that they want to be, or are they bringing them down, right? And we can help them understand that they have the power to make that choice. This is also where children learn acceptance and rejection. This is especially true if you don't have siblings. So me being an only child, of course I was accepted at home, but it was in peer groups in those early stages where I started learning acceptance and rejection. And sometimes it's hard, right? It's hard, it feels super great and the high highs when you're accepted, but it feels really low when you're rejected. And that's something we have to help children navigate through. Friend groups also have, and this kind of piggybacks on the acceptance and rejection idea, is that they have their own sort of hierarchy. And this has nothing to do with parents, right? It's not something that a lot of times even parents are a lot involved in. Of course, hopefully parents know who their friends are and who they're spending time with, but as far as at school, on the playground, you know, who's kind of in control of dictating the play and who just follows along, that hierarchy just happens in its own way through various personalities and things like that. And that's when children start to learn that within the friend groups. It also helps children establish themselves within a generation. So they're with other people that are their same age. At home, you are typically either thinking about yourself in terms of a birth order. If you have siblings, I'm the oldest, I'm the middle, I'm the youngest. Or you're thinking about yourself in terms of, I'm a son or daughter compared to my parents or my grandparents, right? So here they've got a group of peers that are all their same age, they're part of the same generation. And that sets them kind of in a place in history even. I mean, if we're gonna think like really big picture here, it's not just about who they play with on the playground, but this is like setting up who they are in history. As teachers, as family, we get to help children understand and be role models for peer socialization and how that affects us. So if we have a lot of tumultuous relationships with peers, we are probably going to be teaching our children how to have tumultuous relationships with peers. If we have healthy relationships with peers, then we're also modeling that. So even though a lot of times parents or teachers don't have that direct impact on who children pick as their peer groups at school, we still get to model for them how to have healthy relationships. And if we think back, and you guys recently did a discussion on it's your own attachment, or thinking about it, self-reflecting. This is the basis for future socialization. So do children feel secure? Do they feel insecure? All of this relates back to that initial first encounter with socialization that came during the attachment phase. So that first year or few years of life with a significant caregiver. Okay, and we're gonna switch gears again, because another factor that influences socialization is media and technology. This is a major influencer when it comes to our current society, how we interact with one another, how I'm interacting with you all right now, in a sense. So there's some real blessings that come from technology, because we're able to do things that we've never been able to do in terms of exploration, in terms of medicine and life-saving, in terms of being able to connect when we have to be distanced, like during a pandemic. But it also has some concerns, some dangers, specifically to young children that are not as aware of what those dangers are. And so it's our job as teachers and as parents to make sure that we are helping children understand how to use technology properly and monitoring it. The online environment has potentials to be unsafe, right? We have heard that there are very, just as in everywhere, the online world has people that are not in the best interest of our children, or even as us as a human race individually. And so we have to make sure that we're aware of that and that we're putting up safeguards for our children. There are subtle messages that children receive from media and technology. Every platform has some sort of advertisement. There's always ads popping up. If specifically like YouTube, the next video is coming, and sometimes they don't always relate to what that child's watching. And so they can go down that rabbit hole of video after video. It also reinforces to just keep watching, right? Netflix will just start the next episode. It doesn't even ask you, because it just wants you to stay engaged. It doesn't want to let you go. And children are even more susceptible to that. It creates an artificial need. So advertisement, media, ads that children see, whether it's on TV or online, it's always, they prey on the fact that children will be in that comparison mode, like we talked about a little bit with status, where you're going to see something that you want because it's the newest, flashiest thing, or it goes along with the newest movie that's coming out. And it creates this desire to have that item, but it's not only that you want that item, it's that now you don't feel happy with what you have. This became especially true. Many of you probably have heard of him, or if you have kids, I'm sure, Ryan's Toy Review. This became very apparent in my own house, where my son discovered him, and he was opening up new toys and exploring them. And then all I started hearing out of my son's mouth was, how he didn't like what he had, that he wished he had something else, that this thing that he had wasn't good enough anymore. And so that really, we cut off YouTube at that point. So the only time he now gets to watch YouTube is when I'm cutting his hair, because he'll sit nice and still while I'm cutting his hair, and I can directly see what he's watching. And we had a discussion about it. If you're gonna choose to watch an episode of Ryan's Toy Review, I also don't want it to start making you ungrateful for all the things that you have. You have to keep that in balance. If I start hearing those comments and you start to feel that way inside yourself, then you need to make a choice to watch something else. And so now, even though he does watch YouTube when I cut his hair, he'll usually pick something else, because we realized that wasn't healthy for him. It's not healthy for us to always wish that we had something else than what we have. It's not based in reality. So this goes along with that comparison factor, where what is presented typically online is not reality, right? Even a toy, the way it's played with online, is probably not how it's going to actually function in real life, and it's going to be disappointing to that child. Or we go on Pinterest and we think we're going to make this beautiful cake, and then it turns into just like a pile mess. I've done that. It doesn't present itself. You don't see all the errors or the mistakes that people made along the way to get to that really perfect picture of that cake. You don't see anything else that's not in the picture. Pictures can make everything look good from some angle. So it's not reality typically. It's multi-pronged. So that means it feeds into all other areas of our life, where it isn't just about advertising something new. It's about trying to make you feel ungrateful for what you have so that you will buy it. It's about trying to keep you sucked in to media so that you don't stop watching, because they want your viewership so that the ads can influence you even more. It can be very forceful in that sense. And so it's important that we monitor that for young children. A lot of times, a lot of media, depending on what programming you're choosing to watch or to allow your children to watch, can really reinforce stereotypes. And that's not healthy either. We don't want children labeling other children or assuming that they're a certain way because the character was portrayed that way. This happens even in children's programming. So if you want to steer clear of that, pretty much everything on PBS is okay for the most part. It's done and created in a really thoughtful way. So if you want to show your children television shows, go to PBS. It's usually advertisement free, except for maybe other programming they're going to show. And the programming is usually very safe and thoughtful. Children, when exposed to media, can also be pre-exposed to or exposed to sexual innuendo, sexual acts, sexual information much earlier than we want them to be. And we want to make sure that they have a healthy understanding of this and not what they see in the media. And so it's important that we are the ones that educate young children about sex, not the media, because it's not based in reality. It can create an unsafe environment, an artificial need. It can create stereotypes, all these things. Disturbing images. So a lot of children end up seeing traumatic events, violence, and those are things that can reintroduce trauma if that child has actually experienced a trauma in their life. But it can also desensitize them to violence or to abuse that we don't want people desensitized to. And it's really adding to, or social addition can occur. So when a child's primary interaction is through the day, just the screen, even if it's age appropriate content, their brain starts to believe that this is actual socialization, but it also creates a craving for more of this type of socialization. But in reality, the screen is just a one-way mode of engagement. Real socialization comes from two people having a face-to-face interaction. Now, that doesn't mean it can't happen on a screen, like through Zoom, right? But there are two people involved that are having a conversation, and there's a give and take between the two. It's very different than when a character on TV says, "Now you say jump," and the child does, and the character pretends like they heard them, but then the character didn't actually hear them. And so it creates that, again, that false sense of reality. The characters on the screen cannot listen or respond to the child's words. And it's not, again, based in reality, but it has this addiction factor that children just want to keep adding more and more of it to their life. And it's hard to let that grip go. So some things we can do to help protect young children. First is monitor online activity, right? So we want to make sure that we not only know what they're watching, that it's been approved by us, it's safe for them. We'll talk about some ways to know if it's safe, because there's some platforms out there that can be helpful gauges. We want to place safeguards. So as children get older, or even when they're young and they're very into like tapping the screen and going to new things online, you want to put in some safeguards. So there's different programming, different apps that you get to control what can pop up, what the children have access to online. That's important. You want to educate yourself. You don't just want to assume everything is safe and fine. You want to know what's out there, the good and the bad, so that you can protect your children from that. And you want to make sure you're using child-friendly formats. So they're not going to be perfect, but they're at least supposed to be more geared for kids so that the content will be safer. Don't expose your children to television before they're 2. Now, you know, as a parent of 3 kids of all different ages, I can say my oldest did not watch TV before she was 2. I can say my middle was pretty close to 2, but also like probably caught some shows or like was up as a baby at irregular times and we were watching TV. My youngest one, I'm sure, was watching a show before she was 2. The point is that it's also something that you're monitoring your own habits with, that you're mindful of it, that you're not using it as a babysitter, that you're not plopping your children down in front of it, or you're not just having it on all the time so that no one's engaged with each other. And you want to be the model for that. So if you're finding that you're always staring at a screen, and whether you're intentionally doing it or not, ignoring those around you, that's not healthy. That's when you're falling into some of the traps that media wants you to fall into. And you have the power to make that choice. And we want to teach children they have the power to make that choice as well. An option is not to have screens, right? There are some families that don't have their TVs and their media out in the main rooms of the house. So that way it's just not this constant draw or this something that people want all the time. But the other thing that's important is also don't let children just have it in their bedrooms unattended. You want to know what they're watching. You want them to not just have access to it at all times, because children won't always make good decisions for themselves. They'll stay up late and keep scrolling, or they will keep watching show after show after show. So making sure that you monitor that and take a break from it. There are times in my house where when the only thing my children seem to be able to ask me for is when they can watch shows next. And when that's the only thing that they can think of, that's when I say we need a show break. And I've said no shows for a week. I know that sounds crazy. And you would think that I would be punishing myself by not letting them have shows for a week. But the reality is that as soon as it's off the table, they don't keep asking about it. I mean, maybe they ask a little bit, like, really, do we have to? But after the first day of it being a topic of conversation, once they know that we're not watching shows for a week, they stop even asking. And it completely takes that off the table. I don't have to negotiate who gets to watch first. I don't have to negotiate how many shows they get to watch. It just doesn't even become a topic of conversation anymore. And they find other things to do, like be creative, draw, color, build things, play outside. Like a whole new realm of possibility opens up to their minds when media doesn't have that hold on them. So I would encourage anybody to take a show break, because sometimes kids just need it. They need that reset. I also have found, since I'm on this topic, that if they ask for one more show, so usually we do a 2-show limit. So it's like about an hour of TV, 45 minutes to an hour. They'll say, can we watch a third? And sometimes I give in, right? It's just in that moment, I'm fine with it. I'm in the middle of something and I just want them to kind of keep being quiet. And so I'll say, okay, a third show's fine. Well, then the next day they want 3 shows. And then if they can't have it, they whine and complain. Or they'll get the 3rd show and then they'll want another one. It's like, if I just stop at 2, it's usually fine. So you have to, and every child's limit might be different. If you want to do 3 shows, fine. But if you notice that when you start allowing a certain amount and it just makes them more whinier, that's when you know you need to go back down. Or at least that's true for my house and my kids. The other thing that's important is to use media the way it's meant to. A source of entertainment for a small amount of time. And what can be great is sitting together and watching something together. That, I think, is a great way to spend quality time together sometimes, especially when it's 110 degrees outside. You can't go outside and play. You can't, it's just too hot. So sitting in your home where it's cooler and watching programming together that all the family can enjoy, that's totally reasonable, as long as it's not the binge watching for 8 hours. And just the main thing that I think, beyond any of these other ideas, is that you want to make sure that children are not just filling their time with screens. If they have unlimited access, if they don't have other things to do, or the only thing that they can think to do is fill their time with screens, then that's when we're starting to notice some unhealthy behavior, and they're going to be more prone to the negative things that media, or the negative ways that media can influence them, like we talked about on the other side. Okay, so I want to just give you a few recommendations. So the first recommendation is Kids Health. KidsHealth.org has information about everything, from social emotional health to behavior to actual ailments like the flu and immunizations and diabetes. But it also talks about just developmental health as well. And internet safety is one of those. We have to be cognizant of that in this age. And so they have some great information on this. I think I even made, if you're looking at these, yeah, these are links straight to these different resources. So I would encourage you to bring up the slides and actually go explore the links. PBS shows and games. PBS has some really great programming. It does not a lot of times, or most of the time, fall into the stereotypes. It doesn't offer children images or content that they should not be thinking about. A lot of times it will give them social emotional skills. So it usually has some really great thoughtful content that can be educational, but can also be just great for normal growth and development. And so within the limits that we've talked about, letting them explore some of those shows and games can be very healthy, and you can feel safe about what they're watching if they're on those apps. Common Sense Media is a great website because you can put in the title of most movies, of most books, and it will give you an age recommendation. It might even have podcasts on there now, I can't remember. But it has a lot of different media content where you can put in the title and it will bring it up and then tell you what age it's recommended for, what concerns or content might be in that book or movie, so that you can decide, is this a topic that I want my child to be exposed to yet? How much language is in this? I mean, I can't remember every movie. And a lot of times, I can't remember most movies that I watch, to be quite honest. That's like a thing that I have, is I'll watch it and completely forget. And so then I'll think back and go, oh, I don't think that was so bad. And then if I'm watching it with my child, I'm like, oh my gosh, I just said all these words. I can't believe they just made that joke. Oh, I don't want them to know that. So this is a great website to use. You don't have to watch the whole movie or read the whole book before your child does, but you can get a sense of what it's going to be in the content and make a decision based on appropriate recommendations. And then Kiddle. Kiddle is an online search engine for kids. So kiddle.co, and it's like Google, but for kids. And you can at least be a little bit more comforted that if they're typing in Alaska, that just basic information about Alaska is going to come up versus like Alaskan predator goes to jail for blah, 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 whatever. So this way, when kids are doing research or they have to look things up online using this kind of search engine, just put some more parameters in place. They don't have access to maybe all the World Wide Web and the content is there. Obviously, YouTube is huge right now, YouTube Kids. If you're gonna let your children be on YouTube, I would suggest that, because hopefully that has been monitored a little bit more closely than regular YouTube. And so the content will be at least more geared for children. Okay. I think that covers most of this chapter, or at least the highlights. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to let me know, and I'll be in touch soon.